One often discussed trait of Wayland is there is no standard Wayland compositor. There is nothing that everybody targets to make a window manager like you would have for something like Xorg. Now, there is something called Western, and at one point Western did refer to itself as a reference implementation. But a reference implementation is something that you can use as an example to implement your own compositor. It's not that everybody was targeting Western and using that as a base. And that phrasing has been dropped anyway, so it doesn't even really make sense as an example for the modern versions. Now, there are compositor libraries like Smithy, WL Roots, Mir, and things like this, but you use those libraries to make a compositor. You still have to do the work of making a compositor, and there are things like Kwin, Mutter, Sway, Hyprland, Cosmic Comp, Mirrorway. All of these either built from one of those libraries or they make their own. But none of these are intended to be generic solutions. There might be window managers built on top of these components, but in the case of Mutter, Kwin, and Cosmic Comp, they are intended to be used within their respective desktop environments. They're not intended to be generic solutions that anybody can build on top. Basically, what I'm saying is on Wayland, there is no Xorg, the X11 implementation that everybody targets when building a window manager, building a desktop environment, building applications. That just doesn't exist in Wayland land. Now, X11 is a protocol set, like Wayland is a protocol set, and in the past, there have been other implementations of X11. Of course, you had X3D6, which is what Xorg is based on, but going further back than that, or looking at things like macOS, there are other servers which either do exist or have existed. It's just Xorg has so much hold over this space that Xorg is effectively X11. Also, before development fell off, the X11 protocols and Xorg itself were being developed by the same people, so it's kind of that first-party solution. Now, if you were to ask Wayland developers about doing something similar, having an Xorg for Wayland, some compositor that everybody targets, and then they build window managers on top of that like they would in X11 land, they would explicitly tell you this is not going to happen, this is not a goal, and in some cases you might be told that this would be impossible to do and there would be nowhere to cover every single use case. But you know as an Xorg user that that doesn't make sense. That's dumb. We have a thing being Xorg that covers every single use case, so why wouldn't it be possible on Wayland to do the same thing? But here's the key part that is often not discussed. Xorg didn't do every single thing, and X11 was developed at a time where there were very few computing form factors. Effectively, what you had is desktop computers, like you're most likely using now. You had desktop computers where the compute resources were remote, so you're remoting into a mainframe, things like that. Or you have laptops, which are basically portable desktops with a smaller screen. They're all effectively the same form factor. And assuming the goal was to build an Xorg equivalent on Wayland to do those specific goals, assuming you could get everyone to agree, which you're not going to get everyone to agree, so the plane kind of goes out the window, but let's just imagine you could do so. That would be absolutely possible to do. But that's not all we want computers to do now, and that's not all that Wayland is being used for. However, that doesn't necessarily mean it should be the goal of the project. So recently this post was made by Nova, otherwise known as Technobabu, and they work on the Stardust XR project. Without spending an entire video explaining it, it's basically a system for creating virtual reality desktops on Linux. And this is something which greatly benefits from the way Wayland currently works. And not just this, right? It's not just this one use case, and that's the reason everything should be thrown out the window. There is a lot of other use cases outside of just the desktop which Wayland is greatly benefiting. Now, of course, this one is going to have some similarities with regular desktops. You're generally going to want to run your regular desktop applications in this environment, obviously alongside the VR applications, but you don't just want to throw away everything just so you can do that. You want to have a way to bring those applications in, hopefully improve the way you use them, and give you more space to work with them. And like a lot of other Wayland threads, it did kind of explode in a bunch of other directions that are not even remotely related to the original top post. So I will leave the thread linked in the description down below if you want to go check it out for yourself. I mainly care about the first thing being said though. The splitting of protocols in Wayland and compositor implementation were to allow for new form factors. It had to sacrifice the guarantee of all app functionality being present to achieve that. The idea, as I see it, was never to have 500 desktop compositors all trying to re-implement the same thing with slight differences. Now, that is the result that was achieved, and that is at least part of the result, but that wasn't the reason why it was done. These are very important distinctions. It's what happened, but it was done for a reason that applies to other use cases. Instead, it was to have 500 different interfaces for different platforms that are compatible with the same apps, e.g. desktop, laptop, phone, car screens, AR, VR, watch, so on and so forth. Different form factors have totally different ways of dealing with interfaces, but share enough common features where it makes sense to have one base protocol and many other ones for device/form specific features. Now, the purpose of Wayland's insane modularity hasn't been visible to most people, given it's almost always complained about in the desktop context versus X11. And I think in the desktop context, there is a valid reason to complain about it, and the desktop context is kind of the biggest place that people are going to see it. It's the biggest place that people are going to interact with it. In a lot of other contexts, they are either fairly niche areas that, frankly, not that many people care about, or in areas where you wouldn't even notice you are running Wayland because it's a system that you're not actually messing with the software installed on. But X11 was literally only designed for a desktop form factor and has been refined for that one purpose for decades. And honestly, considering how old X11 is, it still does a surprisingly good job. Now, there are a lot of things that are missing. I've talked about it recently: mixed variable refresh rate, HDR, things like this. There are absolutely problems, but the fact that we are still able to do remotely modern things using X11 when it's not really being maintained outside of the X Libre side is genuinely impressive. One example that Wayland makes much easier is IVI. In-vehicle infotainment systems work way better than XOR could have. Desktop window layouting, I don't think is a correct phrasing. Windowing layout makes a lot more sense on that platform, would inherently produce massive amounts of unnecessary complexity and the ability to direct scan-out saves on power/expensive compute. Automotive-grade Linux and Covessa maintain reference interfaces for cars so companies can iterate a ton faster. Wayland gives the app compatibility, and they can make the system UI work with more flexibility and ease than an X11 window manager. Then we have Linux Mobile. The compositor can reliably enforce window layout and boundaries and composition. While this could technically be done with an X11 window manager and compositor, doing it with Wayland guarantees reliability, as the app simply doesn't have a choice or room for error. Some things like drag and drop or toolbars don't make much sense on mobile, given how small the screens are. Then you have areas where X11 is basically unusable. AR/VR, which is what Stardust XR is. The concept of a screen does not exist. How is an app supposed to position itself when the very concept of 3D is not part of the protocol? In Wayland, I just don't have to implement the protocols that don't work, e.g. layer shell, and therefore any apps that don't need it will be compatible. Now, some of these are a lot more used than others. In-vehicle infotainment, for example, a lot of these systems are powered by Linux. There's definitely a lot powered by BSD as well, but a lot are powered by Linux, and you might not even think of what you are running here. You might not even realize what you actually have on the system, but in the background, Wayland is making a lot of that stuff quite a bit easier. Linux Mobile is a small niche, and it's gaining popularity, but it's still pretty small. And then the AR VR space is basically like 2 or 3 projects, and basically nobody uses it, but it is a developing space, and it's a developing space because now it's actually possible to do. Wayland has allowed for insane levels of flexibility, things that no other display server architecture can do reasonably. Total flexibility between app and screen, direct scan out with hacks, AR, VR support, etc. And here are just some random other things which have been done. LG Smart TV UI. So this is a long talk held a couple of years back, talking about what LG is doing, basically making use of Wayland. It's a 24-minute talk, I'll leave it linked down below, and honestly is just really cool. Multiple user collaboration on touch tables with arbitrary rotation. So this is basically a compositor where the intention is multiple people are going to be interacting with it at the exact same time. And when you're in Xorg, you kind of have to deal with the constraints that Xorg is giving you. But when you're fully in control, you're fully in control. Of course, we have various 3D windowing systems, whether it be VR-based, whether it be something like Motorcar, whether it be any of the other random little projects that are out there. Of course, this is a really old project, but it's still something that is actually possible to do. Presentation slides that they themselves are Wayland compositors, so you can actually have demos directly built into the slide system. This is something that was being demonstrated at a QT talk quite a number of years ago. This is actually really, really cool. And you don't just have to integrate those into a slideshow. If there's a way to integrate them into one thing, you can do it in another thing. So you've probably heard a number of times that the cosmic bar, the cosmic panel, is itself a Wayland compositor. And you can integrate widgets into it that can draw literally anything that'll work inside a Wayland compositor. One of the demos shown, I believe, was playing Celeste in the panel. Now, is that a productive thing to do? No, but it does mean that you can do a lot of really cool things with that panel. Now, could Wayland devs maybe distribute features across protocols better, work with app toolkit devs to ensure the protocols they made actually fit what the apps and compositors needed? Oh, absolutely this part. I did bring up in this thread, it's not a protocol, but it's still kind of related. It's the global shortcuts portal, which is never gonna be adopted because it frankly doesn't align with a lot of the use cases that tools like OBS actually want for it. So it's a solution, but it's only a solution on paper because nobody cares to use it. And stopped bike shedding. Oh yes. Oh yes. I don't necessarily agree that a lot of the bike shedding is accounting for other form factors. I do agree that some of it is. A lot of it, though, is just, I wouldn't even call it bike shedding in some cases. A lot of it is frankly just halting protocols because you don't personally have a use case for it. The overarching point being, there was a reason for making it this modular, for not having a standard implementation. It wasn't just devs trying to impose some ideology. It wasn't some corporate takeover. It's good reasons that people using X11 on their desktop and laptop don't encounter. If we had something that wasn't universal, most apps wouldn't be compatible with it, and therefore everything but the desktop form factor would lack apps. Now, I know a lot of people want to say, oh, but a lot of applications are not compatible with it. Didn't you just see the other day that Counter-Strike 2 dropped Wayland support? Yeah, they dropped Wayland support because the devs of CS2 don't test anything, and they introduced more problems enabling Wayland support because they don't test anything. It's not Wayland that was at fault, it's not testing anything. Now, whilst I mostly agree with the points being made here, I'm still very much of the camp there should be some sort of, maybe not standard implementation, standard thing that everybody bases things off, but a standard specification, a thing that describes what a Wayland compositor in certain contexts should be. This is a desktop compositor, this is a VR compositor, this is a signboard compositor, so on and so forth. So developers trying to make compositors in those environments know the minimum set of protocols they should be targeting. Of course, different environments are going to want to have different protocol extensions, but there should be a base set of protocols that everyone in a specific context is expected to implement so that application developers know what protocols are available and know what they can actually try to target. And my opinion of what that minimum set should be has kinda shifted. I do think it's probably for the best that protocols like EXT zones, which is one of the positioning protocols, there's been a bunch of different versions of it available, I do think that should be part of a desktop protocol set. However, when we're talking about the VR space, in a space like that, something like that is just not going to work. You can't really do generic desktop positioning in the context of VR, or just any sort of 3D windowing system. In that environment, there might be a better way to handle it. But when we are talking about areas where it does make sense, where users are able to control their windowing, like on a desktop, like on a laptop, it probably should be part of a set. But either way, I think there should be some discussion about what should be in a set, and any of that discussion should probably start from a clear common ground where everybody kind of agrees on the protocols. Before bringing in any of the remotely controversial protocols, start with the ones that there's not even going to be any argument about whether they should or shouldn't be included. Now, you might still argue the desktop is vastly more important than any of these other use cases, and there still should be an Xorg equivalent on Wayland, and that's totally fine to have as an opinion. But the point of this was to explain why that is not the case, why things have gone the direction that they have gone, not necessarily to say that there is no justification for that being a good direction to go. So, hopefully you learned something. If you did, go like the video, go subscribe, let me know your thoughts down below as well, and if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe, Stelly Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. That's gonna be it for me, and what if I am Wayland all along?